Jordan Hale here, and if you had told me that my entire life would change because of one cold night outside a convenience store in Dallas, I would have laughed in your face because nights like that never changed anything for people like me. They just reminded us of how small the world thought we were. It was a little past 1 in the morning, the kind of hour only tired workers and troublemakers wandered around, and I was neither, though. No one ever believed that when they looked at me. I had just finished a 7-hour shift hauling crates at a warehouse and a 3-hour shift delivering food on my bike, my back aching and my fingers numb from the wind, and all I wanted was 5 seconds to tighten the fraying shoelace holding my entire right sneaker together. I crouched beside the wall near the store entrance, pulling the muddy lace through a broken eyelet when I heard a sharp gasp behind me, followed by a woman's voice rising like a siren. "Someone help that child!" She shouted, her finger slicing the air toward me as if I were a criminal caught mid-act. My head jerked up, confused, and that was when I saw him, a little boy no older than 6, sitting in a battered wheelchair under the flickering street lamp, soaked to the bone, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. Rainwater streamed down his cheeks, mixing with the dirt on his skin, and when I stepped toward him, instinctively gently, he flinched like he expected to be hit. I reached out anyway and brushed his wet hair from his eyes, whispering, "It's okay, buddy, I got you," but I barely got the words out before a security guard charged forward and slammed me against the wall, his forearm grinding into my collarbone. "Step away now," he barked like he had caught me doing something vile. Another guard snatched the boy's wheelchair and pulled it back as if rescuing him from a danger he couldn't name, while people in the parking lot, half hiding under their umbrellas, just stared at me with that familiar expression, the one that said they had already written the entire story in their heads, and no version included me being innocent. Someone muttered typical under their breath. Another whispered, "You never know with these kids." And a man walking past gripped his daughter's hand tighter and steered her away like I carried a disease. I tried to speak. I swear I did. I said, "I'm helping him. He's freezing. He needs to be inside." But my words dissolved in the rain, drowned out by fear and bias and a dozen strangers who didn't care enough to look closer. The guard pressed me harder into the wall, harder than necessary, and for a split second I felt that old burn in my chest, the one that came from growing up in a world that saw my skin, my clothes, my neighborhood, and decided I was the threat. He finally let me go, but he didn't step back right away. He hovered close like he expected me to snap or run or confess to something he had imagined. When he did step back, he kicked over my water bottle with his boot, pretending it was an accident. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a scoff and a shake of his head. The boy now pushed closer to the store's awning, let out a soft cough that sliced right through me. His small body trembled under the weight of the rain. His blanket was soaked and useless, and no one, not one single adult who had judged me moments earlier, made the slightest move to help him now. They dispersed satisfied they had stopped the wrong villain. That was the moment I realized how upside down the world could be. I took off my jacket, the only one I owned, the one I wore to every shift, and wrapped it around his shoulders. He looked up at me with big, frightened eyes, as if he couldn't understand why someone everyone else treated like danger was treating him like a person. "You're safe," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure it was true for either of us. And then something strange happened. The street empty a second ago felt watched. I felt it before I saw it, that quiet prickle at the back of your neck when someone powerful notices you. A black Mercedes SUV sat across the lot engine, humming low-tinted windows, catching the neon glow of the store sign. I wouldn't have looked twice, but there was a figure inside leaning forward just enough that I could see the sharp outline of a man in an immaculate suit watching everything I did. He wasn't reacting. He wasn't moving. He was just studying me, expression hidden but attention razor-sharp, like he was engraving this moment into his memory. I didn't know who he was or why he cared. People like him never noticed people like me unless we were in their way. But he kept watching as I crouched beside the shivering boy, checking his thin wrists, making sure he could breathe, telling him my name, promising him it would be okay until someone who actually belonged to him showed up. The rain kept falling. My jacket kept getting wetter, and that Mercedes didn't move. I didn't know it then, but that silent man in the luxury car would break apart everything I thought I knew about my life, my worth, and the price of kindness. And it all started with one boy, one mistake, and one night the world decided I was trouble before I even opened my mouth. If the night outside that convenience store showed me how little the world expected from me, then the days leading up to it showed exactly why. My name is Jordan Hale, and by 17, I had already lived a lifetime of small defeats that people like to call character building, as if scraping by were some noble journey instead of a slow suffocation. Every morning I woke up in a trailer that shook whenever the wind blew too hard, the kind of place most people in this country pretend doesn't exist because it makes them uncomfortable to imagine American kids waking up to mold on the ceiling and an electrical outlet sparking every time you plugged in a heater. The roof leaked in 3 different spots. When it rained, we put down pots like we were playing a sad metal orchestra. The fridge was mostly empty except for peanut butter, a carton of eggs too expensive to replace often, and whatever leftovers I brought home from the diner, or whatever expired food the grocery manager quietly slipped me before tossing out inventory. My father, once a proud mechanic who could fix any engine with his eyes half closed, had his hours cut so many times he started calling it unemployment in slow motion. He spent his days sending out applications, scrolling job boards, waiting for calls that rarely came, and his nights were spent staring at bills on the kitchen table like he could make the numbers shrink by willpower alone. My little brother Micah, only 12, had epilepsy. His seizures came without warning, sometimes small, sometimes violent enough to make him bite through his lip. The medication that kept him stable cost more than our monthly food budget. Even with insurance, and every pill he swallowed felt like a countdown to when we could no longer afford the next refill. After school, I worked at a local auto shop where the owner liked me, but the customers didn't. They assumed because I was young and black that I didn't know what I was doing, or worse, that I was lying about what needed fixing. One woman refused to let me pull her car into the bay and told my boss she wanted a real mechanic. My boss laughed it off in front of her and apologized to me behind the office door, but apologies didn't erase the sting that settled in my gut every time someone looked at me like I was barely qualified to breathe the same air as them. I also delivered groceries at night through an app biking across Dallas until my legs burned and my hands ached from gripping wet handlebars. Customers tipped well only when I wasn't the one who knocked on their door. When they saw me, you could almost see the dollar signs vanish from their faces. Poverty has a way of making you invisible in some ways and too visible in others. The kids at school pretended not to notice my shoes were splitting at the sides or that my backpack had duct tape on it, but they noticed enough to make jokes behind my back. Goodwill kid, they called me. Trailer boy. I tried to shrug it off because anger was a luxury that only people with stable lives could afford. The irony was that despite all the weight pressing on me, I still believed in kindness. It was the one thing my mother drilled into us before she died of heart complications 2 years earlier. Kindness is the only thing you can give away and still keep. I used to hear her say it every time I held open a door or gave up my seat on the bus. After she died, the words sounded different, less like hope, more like a challenge. People asked me why I worked 2 jobs. They assumed it was because I wanted stuff, shoes, clothes, the normal teenage things. But the truth was, I didn't want anything for myself. I wanted heat that didn't shut off halfway through December. I wanted Micah's medicine stocked without my dad having to choose between paying the water bill or buying groceries. I wanted to keep the landlord from posting another notice on our door, the kind that said we had 5 days to pay or 5 days to pack. He hated me, that landlord. He would drive his truck past our trailer slower than necessary, revving his engine like he was reminding us he owned everything under our feet. One time, he knocked on our door and told my father loudly enough for the entire row of trailers to hear that families like ours should try not to bring down the property value. We didn't say anything because when you're poor in America, silence becomes your armor. You learn that arguing only makes you seem ungrateful, and being ungrateful makes people feel justified in treating you even worse. So I kept working. I kept pedaling. I kept patching up my shoes, lacing them with whatever scrap string I could find. I kept believing that maybe if I stayed good enough, quiet enough, hardworking enough, life would eventually ease up. But every day felt like walking on a thin layer of ice, trying to pretend I didn't hear the cracks forming under my feet. Even at the auto shop where I should have felt safe, I didn't. One afternoon, a wealthy customer looked me dead in the eye after I explained what was wrong with his car and said, You people never take care of anything, do you?" I stood there, jaw tight, swallowing the fire in my chest because I needed the job. I needed every dollar. I told myself it didn't matter, that words couldn't break me. But that wasn't true. Words bruise in slow motion. They settle into your bones. They make you question your own worth long after the person who said them forgets you exist. Despite everything, despite all the judgment and the exhaustion and the quiet humiliation of poverty, I held on to one belief: kindness doesn't cost anything. I repeated it to myself every time I bought Micah's medicine before buying food. Every time I helped someone with a flat tire on the side of the road, even though I was late for work. Every time I stood up for a kid being picked on, even if it meant being the next target. But I didn't know then that kindness also comes with consequences, that sometimes the smallest good deed flips your whole world upside down. And I didn't know that the cracked pavement beneath my feet was about to give way completely. The night everything collapsed did not arrive like a storm, with warning signs or thunder in the distance. It came quietly slipping into my life, the way cold slips into cracked walls unnoticed, until you are already shivering. It was supposed to be an ordinary shift. Another long evening at the auto shop, followed by a string of delivery orders that would get me home past midnight. But around 9:30, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a message from my neighbor, Miss Darlene, a retired nurse who checked in on Micah when my father worked late. "Call me now," it read. My stomach tightened instantly. She never wrote messages like that. I stepped outside the garage as the sounds of power tools hummed behind me, and when she answered, her voice was tight, trembling. "Jordan, it's your brother." He had another seizure, a bad one. My heart dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I could hear Micah whimpering faintly in the background, and the panic in his small breaths stabbed through my chest. I told her I was on my way and sprinted back inside to grab my backpack, ignoring the owner calling after me. The bike ride home was a blur of cold air, wet pavement, and the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. When I burst into the trailer, Micah was on the couch wrapped in a blanket, pale, shaking lightly, his eyelids fluttering. My father knelt beside him, looking older than I had ever seen him, defeat carved deep into the lines of his face. "The medication's low," he whispered without looking at me. "The refill isn't covered until next week. We don't have enough." He held out the pill bottle, shaking it so I could hear the dry rattle of only one dose left. I felt anger rise like a flame under my skin. Anger at the universe, at the system, at the unending cruelty of poverty. I didn't let it show. I knelt beside Micah, brushing sweat off his forehead, whispering that he was okay, even though I didn't believe it. When another tremor rippled through him, I knew waiting wasn't an option. We had to get him to the hospital. My father grabbed his keys, but I insisted on driving because his hands were shaking too much. The drive felt like a nightmare. I couldn't wake from every red light, a personal attack, every honking car, a reminder that time was slipping through my fingers. I carried Micah inside the emergency room calling for help, but the receptionist barely looked up. "Insurance?" she asked, monotone. I swallowed, trying to keep calm. "He's having seizures. We need help now." She repeated the question slower this time, like I was the one failing to understand English. "Insurance." I fumbled in my pocket for the card, handed it over, watched her type with agonizing slowness before she frowned. "This is expired." I told her the new one was still in the mail. She blinked once, unimpressed. "We can treat him, but the deposit is $480 up front." My father leaned against the wall, defeated. I felt something break inside me, a clean snap of despair. I didn't have $480. I didn't even have 50. The security guard stepped closer, arms folded, watching us like we were about to cause trouble. "Sir, you can't block the hallway," he warned, and I wanted to scream. My brother was shaking in my arms, and this man was worried about hallway traffic. I begged them to let us pay later. I told them my brother could die. But the receptionist only repeated the policy, and her eyes had the hollow indifference of someone who had already decided we were not worth fighting for. Eventually, a nurse with a kinder face intervened and took Micah to the back, but not before the guard told me to stay out of restricted areas, as if I had come here to cause chaos instead of save my brother. I paced the waiting room for 2 hours, watching the clock like it was bleeding minutes I couldn't afford. When the nurse finally returned, she said Micah was stable, but the medication needed to be picked up immediately or the seizures would return. She handed me the prescription, and my breath caught when I saw the price. $216. I felt sick. I thanked her and stepped back outside into the cold night air, feeling emptier than I ever had. On the drive home, my father sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window, shoulders slumped. He didn't ask how we were going to pay. He already knew I didn't have an answer. When we pulled into the trailer park, the porch light of the neighbor's home flickered weakly, and before I could even get out of the car, a beer can clattered against the hood. A drunk man from 2 trailers down shouted, slurring his words, yelling for us to keep our trash quiet at night. My father closed his eyes like the sound physically hurt him. I stepped out, jaw tight, but I said nothing. What was I going to do? Fight him? Get arrested? Leave Micah alone? I clenched my fists, inhaled slowly, walked inside, and shut the door on the chaos outside. The trailer was cold, so cold I could see my breath. The electricity bill was overdue again. I tucked Micah into bed, sat beside him until his breathing steadied, and then finally let myself collapse onto the old armchair in the living room. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the entire world pressing against my ribs. I had helped a stranger's child in the rain only hours earlier, but I could not keep my own brother safe. That irony carved something brutal into my chest. It made me feel like the universe was laughing at me, daring me to hope, and then crushing me for doing so. What I didn't know as I sat there feeling utterly defeated was that the moment I helped that little boy outside the convenience store, someone had been watching, and my entire life was about to shift in ways I could not predict. The next morning felt like moving through wet cement, every step heavy, every thought wrapped in exhaustion. I barely slept an hour, too wired from fear and too broke to buy Micah's medication. My father had left early to beg for extra hours at the scrapyard, leaving a note taped to the fridge that simply read, "We'll figure it out." But I didn't believe that. I headed to the auto shop before sunrise, stomach empty, head throbbing. I needed distractions, something to stop my mind from replaying the night before. My boss, who barely remembered my name on good days, tossed me a work order without looking up. Flat tire wealthy client, handle it quick. He emphasized the word wealthy like I needed the reminder. I rolled the car into the bay and nearly choked when I saw the emblem on the hood, a midnight black Mercedes S580 pristine, polished, the kind of car that costs more than my entire neighborhood. I crouched down, started loosening the lug nuts, and tried not to think about how unfair life felt. That was when I sensed someone standing behind me. Not close, but close enough that the air shifted. When I stood and wiped my hands on my coveralls, I finally saw him. The man who stepped out of the shadows looked like someone carved from steel and glass. Tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal overcoat despite the already rising Texas heat. His posture was military straight, his hair perfectly in place, and his eyes cold enough to freeze fire. Eyes I recognized instantly. He was the man in the Mercedes from last night. The man who had watched me struggle in the rain while helping the boy in the wheelchair. He studied me like he was comparing me to a photo he had memorized. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of the grease on my hands, the oil stains on my shirt, the exhaustion carved into my face. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, gaze piercing. "You're the young man from last night," he said finally. "The one who put his jacket on my son." The word son hit me harder than it should have. I froze. "Your son," I repeated. "The boy in the rain." The man nodded once. "Yes, his name is Oliver." And I watched everything. His tone was calm, but something in it made my skin prickle. I swallowed slowly, unsure if I was being thanked or interrogated. "I didn't do anything special," I muttered. The kid was freezing. He leaned slightly closer, and the faint scent of expensive cologne drifted between us. "Most people don't help without being asked," he said. "Especially not at that hour in that neighborhood. Especially not someone like you. Someone like me." I hated how easily those words burned. I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze, even though it made my pulse spike. "Is there something you want?" I asked. If he came to accuse me of something, I was too tired to fight. To my surprise, he extended his hand. "Victor Langston, CEO of Langston Technologies, 42,000 employees, $30 billion valuation. Forbes called me the architect of America's digital future." His voice never changed tone, but every word felt deliberate, like he wanted to see how much weight it carried. I didn't take his hand. I couldn't. My palms were covered in grease, and even if they hadn't been, something about his presence made me feel like touching him would lock me into a contract I didn't understand. He withdrew his hand calmly, as if he had expected the hesitation. "I watched you," he said again. "The way you protected Oliver, the way you ignored everyone yelling at you, the way you chose him." The way he said "chose" made a shiver crawl down my spine. "I didn't choose anything," I muttered. He was alone, scared. Anyone would have done the same. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing the way people do when they're identifying a lie. "No," he said quietly. "You'd be surprised how few people stop." I didn't know what to say to that. Silence stretched between us until he reached into his coat and pulled out a card. It was matte black, no logo, no title, just a phone number embossed in silver. He held it out to me. I asked, hesitant. "What is this, an opportunity?" he said simply. For what I pressed. He studied my face a moment longer, as though gauging how much truth I could handle. For change, for stability, for something better than this. His gaze swept over the shop, the cracked floor, the peeling walls, the cheap fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I felt heat rise in my chest, a mix of embarrassment and resentment. "I don't want pity," I said. "Good," he replied instantly. "I don't offer pity. I offer exchanges." My breath hitched. Exchanges. That word had a weight to it, a promise and a threat wrapped together. What kind of exchange, I asked. He stepped back, adjusting his coat. "Call the number when you're ready to stop drowning." No explanation. No details. Just that. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway, glancing over his shoulder. "One more thing," he said. "You saved my son last night. That debt is mine, not yours, and I always repay my debts." Then he walked away, leaving me standing there with grease on my hands, fear in my chest, and a card in my pocket that felt heavier than metal. I stared at the Mercedes as it pulled away from the curb tires, whispering against the pavement. My life had been sinking for months, bills overdue, job unstable, my brother getting worse. But at that moment, watching that billionaire disappear into the morning haze, I felt something unfamiliar tighten inside me, a sense that the world had just shifted beneath my feet. I didn't know if it was a warning or a lifeline. I only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing about my life would stay the same. The card burned a hole in my pocket for the rest of the day, even as I kept my head down at the auto shop pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal. My brother still needed medication we couldn't afford. My father was working himself to death for pennies. And I was stuck in a job where people treated me like disposable equipment. Still, I didn't call the number. Pride is a strange thing for poor men. You cling to it even when it's the last thing you can afford. By evening, my stomach felt hollow and stiff from hunger. I stopped by the pharmacy after work to check the price of Micah's prescription again, hoping maybe I misread it the first 50 times. I hadn't. The pharmacist, a woman with tired eyes and a polite tone that didn't quite mask her impatience, shook her head. Insurance declined again. Out of pocket was still nearly $400. My chest tightened. I didn't even have 40. I thanked her and stepped outside, leaning against the brick wall as the sun dipped low, turning the sky a pale orange. I felt the weight of everything pressing down, pulling me apart from the inside. My phone buzzed, a message from the landlord reminding me rent was overdue, another from my boss asking if I could cover a double shift the next morning. I shut my eyes, fighting the urge to scream. That was when the black Mercedes rolled up again. Slowly, quietly. Like it belonged to another dimension where time moved differently, and people like me didn't exist unless someone rich needed something. The window lowered, and there he was. Victor Langston, the man with a face carved in precision and a voice that sounded like decisions, not questions. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He didn't ask if I was okay. Men like him didn't ask questions they already knew the answers to. "Get in," he said. I pushed off the wall. Why, I asked. He didn't blink. "Because your brother cannot wait." My breath froze. How the hell did he know I stepped back, anger and fear mixing in a way that made my hands shake? "You have someone following me," I demanded. His gaze didn't change. "I have someone gathering information I need before I make an investment. You're calling me an investment." I shot back. He sighed like I was a child refusing to understand basic arithmetic. "Everything in my life is an investment, including people." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. "I'm not for sale." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't say you were. I said you could be valuable, to yourself and to the people you love." He tapped the passenger seat with 2 fingers. "Get in, Elijah." He said my name with a quiet authority that felt like a command, not a request. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I opened the door and slid inside. The car smelled like leather and money and something colder underneath. The kind of cold that didn't come from temperature, but from living too long above the world and never touching the ground. Victor handed me an envelope without looking my way. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a contract. Real paper watermarked thick and expensive, and a check. A signed check already made out to the pharmacy. My breath caught. It was enough to cover Micah's medication for months. Years if we stretched it. I swallowed hard. "What is this, a job offer?" he said simply. I frowned, flipping through the pages. The position title read, "Personal Care Assistant for Oliver Langston." My voice cracked. "You want me to work for your son?" Victor nodded once. "He has physical limitations from his accident and requires support. The therapists have recommended someone young, someone patient, someone he trusts." I shook my head confused. "He trusts me. He met me for 10 minutes. Victor exhaled through his nose. "Trust is not always built through time. Sometimes it's built through character." His words hit something deep and painful in my chest. I looked at the contract again. The salary was 3 times what I made at the shop. Health insurance, housing assistance, education stipend. It felt unreal. It felt impossible. It felt like the kind of thing people like me didn't get offered unless they were about to pay for it in ways they couldn't imagine. "Why me?" I whispered. Victor fixed his eyes on the road ahead. "Because you didn't walk away," he said. "Most people would have left him there in the rain, convinced someone else would handle it. But you stayed. You gave him your jacket. You shielded him from the storm. You stayed until someone came." He turned to me then, and for the first time, I saw something flicker behind the steel. Something almost human. "My son is afraid of strangers," he said quietly. "But last night, he wasn't afraid of you." I looked down at the check, then at the contract. My throat felt thick. "And what do you want in return?" I asked. There was always something. Always. Victor didn't hesitate. Stability, structure, responsibility. You show up. You do the job with the same intention you showed last night, and I handle the rest. My heart pounded. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no railing. One step could save me. One step could kill me. "I don't want pity," I said softly. "Good," he replied. "I don't offer pity, only opportunity." I held the pen without meaning to. My fingers trembled. I thought of Micah gasping for air. I thought of my father working through back pain so severe he couldn't stand straight. I thought of our trailer smelling like mold after the last storm. I thought of the boy in the rain who reached for my hand like I was the only safe thing in the world. And before my fear could stop me, before pride could choke me again, I signed. Just like that, my life split in 2. Before this moment, and everything after. I showed up at the Langston estate the next morning with the kind of nerves that make your stomach twist into knots, the kind that remind you you're stepping into a world where you don't belong. The gate alone was taller than any building on my block, and the driveway looked like a road leading to another universe. When I knocked, a housekeeper answered and guided me through halls that were so polished I felt like I should take off my shoes. Everything smelled like expensive candles and silence, the kind of silence money buys. She led me to a sunlit room with floor-to-ceiling windows, and there he was, Oliver. He sat in his wheelchair by a table full of Lego pieces, a blanket tucked around his legs, his small hands fidgeting with a blue brick. He looked up when I stepped inside, his eyes big and unsure, the same eyes that had stared up at me through pouring rain the night we met. For a moment, we just looked at each other, both of us waiting for the other to speak first. "Hello, Elijah," he said quietly, almost whispering, like the words weighed something. I stepped closer, trying not to act like my heart was pounding. "Hey, buddy," I said, kneeling beside him. "You remember me?" Oliver nodded once, shy but certain. "You stayed," he murmured, fingers tugging at the edge of his blanket. "In the rain. Nobody stays when it rains." His words hit me harder than they should have. I swallowed past the ache in my throat. "Well, I wasn't going to leave you there. Freezing, was I?" That earned me a tiny, almost smile, quick and fragile, like it might break if I looked at it too long. I asked if he wanted to build something together, and he nodded again, sliding a little closer to the table. I sat beside him awkwardly at first, trying to act like I knew what I was doing. But as soon as I started snapping bricks together, he leaned toward me, studying what I built. His little brow furrowed in concentration. "You're making it wrong," he said. I blinked. "I am." He nodded very seriously. "That piece goes on the other side." I laughed despite myself and switched the pieces. "That's better," he whispered. And just like that, the ice cracked. Slowly, brick by brick, he talked more. Not a lot, but enough to let me see pieces of him that felt too heavy for a 6-year-old to carry. He told me he used to run, that he loved playgrounds, that the wheelchair wasn't forever, but it felt like forever. He told me loud noises scared him now. Crowds, too, and storms. But the thing he told me that stuck the most, the thing that lodged in my chest and refused to leave, was when he said, "Daddy doesn't know I'm scared all the time." I knew then what kind of loneliness he lived with. Not the poor kind, not the hungry kind like mine, but the kind where the world is full of people who forget you're human because you don't fit into the version of life they designed. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just listened. And somehow that was enough for him. Around noon, Victor walked in. The air changed instantly, like the room itself straightened its spine. He watched us without speaking, his expression unreadable. But I saw something flicker in his eyes when he noticed Oliver leaning toward me, calm in a way he hadn't been earlier. Oliver didn't notice him right away, too focused on the castle we were building. When he finally did, he stiffened. "Hi, Daddy," he said quietly. Victor nodded at him, then looked at me. "How is he?" he asked. I shrugged slightly. "Good. Quiet, but good." Victor didn't smile, but something softened around his eyes. He turned to Oliver. "Show me what you two built." Oliver's face lit up pride, flickering through his features like sunlight through clouds. He lifted the little Lego tower with both hands, showing it to his father. Victor studied it carefully, then murmured, "Very nice. You did well." The praise made Oliver glow. But what hit me was the way Victor looked at me next, like he was seeing something he didn't expect, as if my presence had shifted something in the room he wasn't prepared for. After lunch, I helped Oliver through his physical therapy exercises. He struggled when we practiced standing with the parallel bars. His legs trembled, his arms shook, his breaths came in quick, panicked bursts. "It's okay," I said softly, steadying his back. "I won't let you fall." He squeezed the bars tighter. "Don't go," he whispered. "I'm right here," I said. And I meant it. Step by step, he pushed through the fear leaning on me when he needed to, finding his balance when he didn't expect to. When he finally sat back down exhausted, he looked at me with something like trust. Real trust. The kind kids don't give easily. The kind adults rarely earn. Later that evening, when I was packing up to leave, Oliver tugged at my shirt. "Elijah." "Yeah, bud. Will you come back tomorrow?" The question was so small, so simple, but it went straight to the place inside me I usually kept locked up. I crouched down, meeting his eyes. "I'll be here," I said. His shoulders relaxed, the tension melting away. "Okay," he whispered. "Good." I walked out of that house feeling something shift in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the kind tied to money or survival, the kind tied to being needed, to being seen. Victor stood near the doorway as I left, watching me again with that same unreadable expression. "You made progress today," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't even approval. It was a statement, a fact. But something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. I nodded once, unsure how to respond. As I stepped into the cool evening air, he added quietly, "My son doesn't trust us easily. Whatever you did today, keep doing it." And for the first time since I met him, there was no steel in his voice, no calculation, just a father speaking the only truth he knew how to say. The door closed behind him, but my chest stayed warm long after the house disappeared from view. Because that was the day I realized something I didn't expect at all. I wasn't just helping Oliver. He was helping me, too. I should have known the calm wouldn't last. In my life, good days never came without a price attached, and the higher the moment, the harder the fall waiting around the corner. 3 weeks into the job, I had fallen into a rhythm with Oliver waking up earlier than I ever had, showing up at the Langston estate before sunrise, helping him through his stretches, then guiding him through sensory games and strength exercises the therapists had laid out. Every day he trusted me a little more, and every day Victor watched us from a distance, like he was trying to figure out how something so simple could work when a dozen specialists couldn't break through. For a moment, I let myself believe I was finally doing something right. For a moment, I let myself think this job would stick. Then came the day everything cracked. It was supposed to be a good day for Oliver. His new mobility chair had just arrived, lighter and easier to maneuver. He was excited, bouncing his knees the way he did when he tried to hide it. We took him to the garden therapy courtyard, one of those places rich people called peaceful and poor people like me called unreal. Flowers everywhere, fountains that sounded like rain, the kind of space designed for healing because someone paid to make it look that way. I helped Oliver transfer into his new chair, double-checking the straps. Another therapist, Susan, nodded approvingly. Everything was routine, normal, safe. For 10 whole minutes, Oliver glided around the courtyard, taking careful turns, testing the controls, smiling to himself in that small, quiet way I was learning to treasure. Then, the wheel caught something, a sharp click, then a jerk. I lunged forward just as the chair tipped sideways. Oliver fell hard, his shoulder hitting the edge of the stone path before rolling onto the grass. He cried out in a way I had never heard before, raw panic cutting through the air like a siren. My stomach dropped. I scrambled to him, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, I'm here. You're okay, buddy." But his breath was fast broken tight with fear. His hands seized the grass, trembling violently. Susan was shouting for help. 2 guards rushed in, everything blurred. When I checked his chair, I felt my blood run cold. The safety latch on the left stabilizer wheel wasn't locked. And not like someone forgot. It looked tampered with, deliberate, loose in a way that didn't happen on accident. I looked around, scanning faces, searching for answers or guilt or even coincidence. But all I saw were people staring at me, only at me. And then Victor appeared. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked through the courtyard like a storm disguised as a man stepping over the fallen chair, with eyes burning through everything in his path. "What happened?" he asked, voice low and lethal. Susan answered, first, breath uneven. The stabilizer failed. He fell. Victor's gaze snapped to me. "Where were you?" I swallowed, forcing words through a throat that suddenly felt too tight. Right beside him. I reached for him the second that didn't answer his question. It wasn't what he was asking. He wasn't asking where I stood. He was asking why his son ended up on the ground at all. Before I could respond, another voice cut in. "Sebastian." His polished shoes clicked against the stone path, his suit perfect as always, his smile sharp-framed with the kind of power people get drunk on. For Victor's second in command, he didn't hide how much he hated seeing me here. Elijah, he said with false sympathy dripping from every word I told the board, this role required someone with formal medical training. We can't take risks with Oliver's safety. I stared at him, feeling something poisonous rise in my chest. Something wasn't right. He was too prepared, too quick to speak, too eager to lay this at my feet. Victor didn't take his eyes off me. Elijah, did you lock the stabilizer? Yes. My hands shook. I always double-check. Then it must have unlocked on its own, Sebastian said. Machines fail, people fail, but we can't afford either. His words were a hook carefully baited, designed to pull Victor toward the conclusion he wanted, and for a moment, Victor seemed to sway. Just for a moment. That was enough to make me feel like I was drowning. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to insist I checked the chair twice, that I would never put Oliver in danger. But before I could, 2 more staff members arrived carrying a printed incident report. Already written. Already signed. Already blaming me. It was impossible, unless someone planned it. Sebastian accepted the report with a satisfied look and handed it to Victor. We'll need to document this properly, he said. For insurance, for liability, for Oliver. The world around me felt like it shrank into a single suffocating point. Oliver, still trembling, clung to my sleeve with small shaking fingers. Elijah didn't mean to, he said through shallow breaths. He didn't mean to. I looked at Victor, desperate for him to hear that, to see what was right in front of him, but his expression didn't change. He was a fortress again. Closed. Armored. Cold. I'll handle this, he told the others. Everyone out. The courtyard emptied. Oliver was taken inside. Susan followed. Sebastian lingered in the doorway just long enough to give me a look that said this was exactly what he wanted. Then he disappeared too, leaving just me and Victor. The silence between us was brutal. Finally he spoke. One sentence that crushed me more than every insult I'd ever heard in my life. Tell me why my son fell on your watch. The air broke in my lungs. I forced myself to breathe. I locked the stabilizer, I said. Someone tampered with the chair. His jaw tightened. That is an accusation with consequences. Yes, for whoever did it. He stared at me for a long time. Too long. And I realized with a hollow, sinking feeling that he wasn't sure if he believed me. That hurt more than anything Sebastian said, more than falling back into poverty ever could. This job wasn't just a paycheck. It wasn't charity. It was the first time in years I felt like I mattered. And now it was slipping away because someone decided I didn't belong here. Victor finally spoke again. Go home. I'll decide what happens next. His voice was colder than the rain had been the night I first met Oliver. I left the estate with my chest tight, my heartbeat uneven, my hands shaking like the world was falling apart again. Because in a way, it was. This time, not because I failed, but because someone wanted me gone, and they were willing to hurt a child to make it happen. I went home that night feeling like the world had shrunk into something sharp and suffocating, like every breath scraped the inside of my ribs. I lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the dripping faucet, the rattle of the old heater sounds I'd learned to tune out years ago, but now they felt louder than my heartbeat. My father fell asleep on the couch, his hand still gripping the overdue electric bill, and my little brother was curled up beside him, breathing softly after another exhausting day of medication and monitoring. I had done everything right, everything I knew how to do, and still, someone had managed to make me the villain in a story that wasn't mine. I kept replaying the fall in my head, the click, the sudden tilt, the sound of Oliver's scream. And beneath it all, there was a question I couldn't shake. Who would sabotage a disabled kid's chair just to get rid of me? Only one name made sense. Sebastian. He had disliked me from the moment I walked in on my first day. The kind of dislike that came from thinking someone like me didn't deserve to be anywhere near someone like him. I didn't have proof. Not yet, but I wasn't going to let him take my job, my future, or worst of all, Oliver's trust. By sunrise, I was back at the Langston estate. Not as an employee, Not even as a guest. Just a man who refused to be framed. The guards at the gate stiffened when they saw me exchanging a look that told me they'd already heard the rumors. One stepped forward. "Elijah, you're not scheduled today." "Victor said I cut him off. I need to check yesterday's camera logs." He flinched slightly. "Not allowed without authorization." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Then call the person who tampered with that rule." He hesitated, then stepped aside. Maybe he saw the determination in my eyes. Maybe he recognized injustice when he saw it. Or maybe he had kids of his own and knew what it sounded like when a man fought for the truth. I walked through the courtyard where it happened. The chair was gone. The grass still had marks from Oliver's fall. I crouched down, tracing the indentations with my fingertips. Then something caught my eye. Tiny scratches in the concrete near where the stabilizer had failed, the kind of marks metal made when twisted with force. I took pictures. I followed every path. I checked every angle. Then I walked inside and headed straight for the security room. It was empty except for one person. Nora. Victor's right hand, sharp-eyed, always calm, always watching. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Elijah, they told me you'd come back." I crossed my arms. "Did they also tell you why?" She sighed like she had been waiting for this conversation. "I know Sebastian has been concerned about your position." "Concerned? You do not sabotage a child's chair out of concern." Her jaw tightened. "We do not know he did." I stepped closer. "But we know he wanted me gone." Nora didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the monitors. "What do you think you'll find?" she asked quietly. "Something everyone else missed." She hesitated, then unlocked the archives. For the next hour, I combed through hours of footage, every angle of the courtyard, every hallway, every entry point. I saw Oliver smiling as he tested the chair. I saw myself adjusting the straps. I saw the therapists walking away. I saw guards passing through the corridor. Nothing suspicious. Then, just when I thought I'd been wrong, the camera flickered. 3 seconds of static. 3 seconds missing. 3 seconds at the exact moment Oliver's new chair had been delivered earlier that morning. Nora leaned closer. "That is not normal." No, it wasn't. And when the image returned, the delivery technician was already walking away. I zoomed in on the uniform, the badge number, the face. Only, it wasn't a technician. The uniform was right. The badge was right. But the man's face didn't match the ID photo of the scheduled delivery worker. Someone else had shown up that morning pretending to be him. Someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Nora's voice came out low. "That is not company protocol." I looked at her. Then who cleared him past the front gate? We checked the logs, and there it was. Clearance granted. "By Sebastian." Nora's eyes widened. "He authorized a fake technician." I didn't even try to hide the anger in my voice. "He wanted me blamed. He wanted me humiliated. He wanted me gone." Nora swallowed. "You need to take this to Victor." "No." I stared at the footage, thinking of Oliver, thinking of the fear in his voice as he cried on the ground. I need to take it to him and make sure he listens. This time he has to listen. I printed the screenshots, the logs, the timestamps, everything. My hands shook not from fear, but from adrenaline from the rising fire of knowing that the truth was finally in my hands. I walked through the mansion past staff who whispered when they saw me, past hallways where I once felt invisible. I headed straight to Victor's office. The door was open. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, silhouette outlined against the morning sun. He didn't turn when I entered. "Elijah, I thought I told you to." I dropped the folder on his desk. He turned, slowly. I could feel his eyes on me like, "Wait, what is this? Proof." He opened the folder. One page, then the next. His expression shifted. Just slightly. Enough for me to see the truth hitting him hard. He lifted his gaze. "Where did you get this, the security room?" Nora helped me. His jaw tightened. "And this man, the fake technician." "He was authorized by Sebastian," I finished. "He signed him through the gate. He gave him access to the courtyard. He put my name in the incident report. He set me up, and he hurt your son to do it." Silence swelled between us, heavy, electric. Victor wasn't a man who reacted loudly. He reacted deeply, and what I saw in his eyes at that moment wasn't anger. It was something darker, more dangerous. He closed the folder. "Elijah, you did good." My chest loosened. For the first time in days, I could breathe. But Victor wasn't finished. His voice dropped. "Now let me handle the rest." As I walked out of his office, one thought echoed through me with the force of a heartbeat. I wasn't done fighting, but neither was he. The next morning felt like the air itself had been stretched thin, tight enough to snap with one wrong move. I barely slept pacing the living room while my father snored softly on the couch, and my little brother's medical monitor beeped in its steady rhythm. I kept replaying Victor's face from yesterday, the way his eyes hardened as he turned the folder over in his hands. I didn't know what he would do, but I knew something had shifted. By the time I reached the Langston building, my stomach was twisted so tightly it felt like wire. The lobby was strangely silent. Employees whispered as I walked past their glances, sharp, curious, judgmental. They all knew something was happening. Big things always ripple through power structures long before the public sees the wave hit. When the elevator opened on the executive floor, Nora was waiting for me. Not her usual calm. She looked tense, jaw-locked tablet clutched against her chest. "They're already inside," she murmured. "You're supposed to wait here." I shook my head. "Not happening." Nora stepped in front of me. "Elijah, this is the board of Langston Technologies. These are men who have controlled billions for decades. They're not your neighborhood landlords. They framed me without asking questions," I cut in. "They can hear what I have to say." Her eyes softened for a second. Maybe admiration. Maybe warning. "If you walk in," she whispered, "you don't get to walk back out the same person." "Good," I said. "I'm tired of being the same person." I pushed past her. The boardroom door was already cracked open. Voices echoed through the hallway, low-controlled, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. And then I stepped inside. 12 suits turned toward me instantly, expressions shifting from annoyance to confusion to irritation. At the head of the table sat Victor Langston, posture rigid, hands clasped like a judge delivering a verdict. To his right sat Sebastian, perfectly composed, too. Composed jaw-tight eyes flicking to me in disgust and fear disguised as confidence. The moment stretched. Someone finally spoke. Mr. Hale, one board member said, adjusting his glasses. "This meeting is not open to staff." I walked forward anyway. "Good thing I'm not here as staff." A ripple of scoffs circled the table. Sebastian leaned back, folding his arms. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I stared him down. "Giving you the chance to confess before I expose you." Laughter, short, humorless, from one of the older board members. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Victor, why is this boy here?" Victor didn't answer. He simply raised one hand. Silence fell. Then he said, "Show them." My heart kicked hard against my ribs. So he wanted me to lead this. Not him. Me. I stepped forward and placed the folder "Know the Evidence" on the center of the table. "You all received an incident report naming me as the cause of Oliver Langston's fall," I said. "A report supposedly backed by security footage and staff testimony." "You believed it." I turned toward Sebastian. "Because he wanted you to." Sebastian rolled his eyes. "This is absurd. I have better things to do than entertain conspiracy theories." "Really?" I said softly. "Then explain why the technician who delivered Oliver's chair that morning wasn't the real technician." A flicker. Just a flicker in his face. The board members exchanged looks. One frowned. "What are you implying?" I tapped the folder. "That the technician was an imposter authorized through the gate logs by a single executive, Sebastian Wexler, and that 3 seconds of camera footage were corrupted at the exact moment he was handling the stabilizers." Murmurs. Papers shifting, chairs creaking. The air thickened. Sebastian stood quickly. "This is outrageous. Victor, you're not seriously—" "Sit," Victor said quietly. It wasn't a request. It was a command carved from stone. Sebastian sat. I pulled out the printed still frames, the screenshots of the fake technician, the time-stamped gate logs, the file showing Sebastian's override code. Then, the final blow, the audio recording of him berating the real technician on the phone, threatening his job if he spoke to anyone. As the recording played, Sebastian's face drained of color. The boardroom became dead silent, except for his own voice echoing through the speakers, cruel, desperate, unmistakable. When it ended, no one moved, not even Victor. I took a step back. "He didn't just frame me," I said. "He compromised a disabled child's safety to do it." A board member slammed his hand on the table. "Sebastian, is this true?" Sebastian stood, eyes darting wildly. "No, this is all taken out of context. I was protecting the company, Victor, you know me." "I thought I did," Victor said quietly. The quiet was worse than shouting, worse than rage. It was the quiet of a man sealing a decision. Sebastian lunged for the folder, but security stepped in, grabbing his arms. "You can't do this," he yelled. "You're siding with him, with a nobody." Victor rose, slowly, deliberately, and when he spoke, the temperature in the room dropped. "He's the only reason my son is alive today." His voice shook not with weakness but with fury he was restraining out of sheer discipline. "And you are the reason he was nearly injured again." Sebastian's face twisted. "You're ruining my career over some charity case. Take him out," Victor said, without looking at security. As Sebastian was dragged from the room shouting threats no one cared about, I felt something inside me loosen. Something I had been holding so tightly it had become part of my spine. When the door finally shut, Victor stepped toward me, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense, eyes unreadable. "Elijah," he said quietly. I was wrong. 4 words. Just 4. But they hit me with the weight of years. Years of being dismissed, underestimated, blamed, unseen. For the first time in my life, someone with power said, "I mattered." I swallowed hard. What happens now? Victor looked around the room. 12 powerful men silent, waiting for his next move. Then he answered. "Now," he said, "we rebuild with truth." And for the first time since the night I found Oliver shivering in the rain, I let myself breathe. The days after the boardroom showdown felt unreal, like someone had quietly replaced my life with a version I had once been too afraid to dream of. It wasn't sudden wealth or fame or applause. It was something simpler, deeper, stranger. It was the feeling of no longer walking into a room expecting to be the lowest-ranked person inside. It was the first morning I woke up and didn't check my phone to see if the power company had finally shut us off. It was the sound of my little brother laughing. Really laughing after his new medication kicked in. Victor didn't offer me some lavish reward or hand me a blank check. That wasn't his style. Instead, he called me into his office 2 days later, the skyline of the city glowing behind him as if it were part of the architecture of his power. He didn't stand or make small talk. He simply gestured for me to sit, his expression unreadable as always. But something about the room felt lighter. "I have an offer," he said, sliding a document across the glass desk. My heart thudded. "Another job?" "A role," he corrected. "One with responsibility. One that requires integrity." I scanned the form. The title wasn't flashy. Family Liaison and Accessibility Coordinator for the Langston Foundation. It didn't involve boardrooms or high-stakes negotiations. It wasn't some executive position they gave out like candy to heirs and Ivy League interns. It was real work. Work helping families like mine navigate disability services, medical care, therapy, access, and financial hardship. It was work that mattered. "Why me?" I asked slowly, trying to keep my voice level, trying not to let the tremble of disbelief show. Victor leaned back, crossing his arms. "Because you understand what it means to be powerless," he said, "and you don't want anyone else to feel that way." The words hit harder than anything I expected. "Also," he added dryly, "you're the only one Oliver listens to, and that alone is worth the salary." I almost laughed, but the truth softened my chest in a way that made smiling hard. I signed the contract. Not because I felt obligated, not because I thought I owed him anything, but because for the first time in my life, someone powerful believed I could help shape something bigger than myself. The next weeks blurred into a routine I had never known. I traded my grease-stained work shirt for neatly pressed collared ones. Not expensive, just clean, comfortable, professional. I learned how to navigate the foundation office where the walls were plastered with photos of charity events, hospital programs, and community centers. People greeted me with nods instead of suspicion. No one followed me around like I might steal the stapler. I wasn't the repair kid. I wasn't the delivery guy. I wasn't the trailer park charity case. I was Elijah Hale, a full-time employee with an ID badge and a desk with my name on it. But the world didn't magically become soft. Some staff members still eyed me like I'd walked in through the wrong door. Some whispered behind my back, voices dripping with resentment. Victor's pet project, they'd mutter. Some diversity hire. He'll be gone in a month. Old wounds reopened, but I didn't bleed the same way anymore. Maybe because Oliver would roll into my office with that brilliant, crooked smile, holding up a drawing of us flying kites, even though neither of us had ever flown one together. Maybe because my father, for the first time in years, found steady part-time work through one of the Foundation's partner programs. Maybe because my brother's doctor finally said the words I'd been praying to hear. He's improving. Or maybe because there were parents who hugged me after I helped them secure therapy for their kids. People who cried in my office because someone finally listened. The work grounded me, pulled me in, grew me in ways I never expected. But even as things improved, something inside me resisted the idea that this could last. Every time I walked into Victor's office for updates on Oliver, I braced myself for the moment he'd tell me my usefulness had expired, that he'd found someone more qualified, more polished, more deserving. Instead, he'd ask about my brother's health, or pass along an anonymous donation that covered half our medical debt, or hand me a list of families needing immediate support, saying, "You're better with them than anyone else." He trusted me, and it terrified me. One evening as I was packing up my things, Oliver knocked his small fist against my doorway, grinning from ear to ear. "Dad says we're going to the new therapy center tomorrow," he said. "He wants you there." "Me." I blinked. "Why?" Oliver shrugged like the answer was obvious. "Because you're part of our team." My throat tightened. A team, not a sidekick or servant or temporary stand-in. A team. That night when I returned home, our trailer didn't feel as suffocating as before. The walls were still thin, the roof still patched, the carpet still stained. But the air had changed. My dad was cooking spaghetti, real spaghetti, not canned, and my brother was playing a video game with actual energy in his face. My father looked at me as I came in, and something like pride flickered behind his tired eyes. "You're doing good, son," he said. Just that. But those words felt heavier than any paycheck. Still, even with everything getting better, one question wouldn't leave me alone. One I asked myself every night while staring at the ceiling. Why me? Why did Victor believe in me so quickly? Why did he trust me enough to give me real responsibilities? Why did he look at me not like a charity case, not like a liability, but like someone familiar? Something deeper was there. I could feel it. And the answer, when it finally came, was nothing like what I expected. But that was the next chapter, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my father, about Victor, and about the history that tied us all together, long before the night I found Oliver in the rain. I knew something was coming the moment Victor asked to see me in his private office. Not the main one where assistants passed through every 10 minutes, but the quiet one on the top floor with no traffic, no noise, no interruptions. The kind of room where people heard truths they weren't supposed to hear. When I stepped inside, the lights were dim, the city glowing through the massive windows behind him, turning his silhouette into a dark, unreadable figure. He didn't gesture for me to sit this time. He didn't offer water or pretend to look at paperwork. He simply said, "Close the door, Elijah." My stomach tightened. I did as he asked, then waited for him to speak. Instead, he walked to a locked drawer, pulled out a small battered envelope and set it on the table between us. It looked wildly out of place in this room of polished wood and steel, like something fragile had wandered into a world where everything was sharp. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. No. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. He tapped the envelope, his fingers stiff. Your father gave this to me 23 years ago. The room tilted. My chest tightened. My father. Yes. He paused as if the memory still carried weight, maybe even pain. I wasn't always the man you see now. He began slowly. I wasn't wealthy, powerful, or respected. Before the company, before the billions, before the polished suits and investors, I was a runaway. 16, angry at the world, homeless. I blinked, stunned. Victor never talked about himself. He never revealed anything personal, not to the board, not to the staff, not even to Oliver's team of specialists. Yet now his voice wasn't the cold, controlled tone I knew. It was rough or scraped by something old. I left home after a fight with my father, he continued. I thought I could survive on pride. Turns out pride isn't worth much when you're freezing in December. He swallowed once, eyes drifting somewhere far away. Your father found me outside a bus station. I was half-conscious, shaking from the cold, too stubborn to ask for help. I tried to picture my dad younger before the years of layoffs and medical bills carved lines into his face. What did he do? Victor opened the envelope, pulling out a faded photograph. He held it toward me. My breath caught. It was a picture of a teenage boy wrapped in a jacket I knew too well. My father's old work jacket, the one he kept hanging behind the door for years, the one he never let anyone throw away. He saved my life, Victor said quietly. He brought me into the station, bought me soup, gave me water, and he gave me this. He touched the corner of the jacket in the photo, his coat, said it was just something warm, but I knew it was more than that. It was all he had to give. My eyes burned. I stared at the picture, the truth unraveling like a thread pulled from a memory I didn't know existed. He never told me, I whispered. Victor nodded. Because he didn't do it for credit. He said something I've never forgotten. His jaw tightened, repeating the words as though reciting scripture. Kindness is the only thing that saves a man. My father's words. Words he used to say to me when things got bad. Words I thought were just hopeful talk from a man beaten down by life. But now I understood he said them because they had once saved someone else. Someone who would become one of the most powerful men in the country. Someone standing in front of me now. Victor continued, his voice lower. When Oliver told me what happened that night in the rain, how you wrapped your coat around him, I saw your father in you. My chest cracked open. I felt the weight of it all, my father's past, my choices, Victor's motives crashing together like waves slamming into the same shore. So this opportunity, the job, all of it, Victor stiffened, anticipating my accusation, was not charity, he said firmly. I didn't help you because I owed your father. I helped you because you acted exactly as he once did. Not because of money, not because anyone was watching, because it was right. His voice hardened again, regaining its usual steel. Kindness is rare, rarer than talent, rarer than brilliance. When I saw it in you, I wasn't going to let the world crush it. I exhaled, shakily overwhelmed. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Victor's eyes softened not much, just enough for the truth to show. Because I needed to know who you were before you knew who I was. He stepped closer, placing the photo into my hand. Your father changed the direction of my life, Elijah. Not by saving me from danger, not by giving me money, but by reminding me that humanity still existed in the world. He let out a long breath. I've spent years trying to repay that lesson, but I realize now I can't repay it to him. Only to you. The words tore through me, raw and unexpected. Victor paused, voice steady but carrying something new, something almost vulnerable. You asked me why I trust you, he said. This is why. My hand trembled around the photo. Everything I thought I knew collided with everything I felt. My father, the man who worked himself to the bone, who apologized when bills were late, who carried quiet burdens without complaint, had once held the power to change the entire trajectory of a stranger's life. My throat tightened. He would have been proud, I whispered. Yes, Victor said softly. He would. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It wasn't awkward. It was full alive with the truth that two lives once separated by circumstance were now tied together by something deeper than luck or gratitude. Kindness had traveled across decades to land in this room, in our hands, in our choices, and it wasn't done yet. When I finally looked up, Victor nodded toward the door. "There's something else," he said. "Something I want to show you." My pulse quickened. I didn't know it yet, but what waited on the other side of that office would change not just my understanding of the past, but the path I would walk for the rest of my life. I followed Victor out of the office, still gripping the old photograph like it was something alive, something breathing. The world around me felt different, like every step carried the weight of a past I never knew belonged to me. He said nothing as we moved down the hallway, and in that silence, I felt the echo of my father's voice, the memory of his tired hands fixing broken engines, the way he always said kindness mattered, even when life gave him every reason to stop believing it. Victor stopped in front of an elevator I'd never used before, one that required a keycard only he carried. When the doors opened, we descended not to another suite or meeting floor, but to a level beneath everything, a space lit with soft, warm lights and lined with glass windows overlooking a large therapy center I'd never seen. Children in wheelchairs worked with physical therapists, some standing between parallel bars, some laughing as robotic braces helped them walk. Parents sat nearby, watching crying quietly, praying without words. It was the most hopeful place I had ever seen. "This is the Langston Mobility Initiative," Victor said quietly, stepping closer to the glass. "We started it after Oliver's accident. It wasn't enough to save my son, we wanted to save others too." My chest tightened. I stared at the room, feeling something rise in me so powerful I couldn't name it. Then Victor turned to me. "Everything you see here," he said, "is what I built from the life your father saved." My breath caught. I didn't know what to say. "How could I answer something like that?" Victor continued, his voice softer. "But there's something missing. Someone missing. Someone who understands these kids not from a textbook, but from life. Someone who knows how to look at a child in a wheelchair and see a person, not a burden." He met my eyes. "Someone like you." The words hit deeper than any praise I'd ever heard. He wasn't offering charity, or ego, or applause. He was offering purpose. "I want you to take a bigger role here," he said, "not just working with Oliver. I want you to help lead the entire youth program." My throat tightened. "Victor, I don't have degrees, certifications, titles." "You have something more important," he interrupted. "Character." I swallowed hard. The truth was, I wanted this. Not because of the money, not because of the opportunity, because helping Oliver had become the one part of my life that felt true. And now Victor was asking me to help dozens of kids like him. Maybe hundreds. Maybe thousands. I felt suddenly unsteady. I wasn't used to a future that felt bigger than survival. After a long moment, I said quietly, "I'll do it." Victor's shoulders relaxed, like he'd been holding his breath. "Good," he murmured. "Then there's one more thing." He nodded toward the door at the far end of the hall. I followed him there, and when he opened it, I froze. Inside was my father's jacket, cleaned, preserved, displayed in a glass case like something sacred. A small plaque beneath it read, "The coat that saved a life. Donated anonymously." My knees almost buckled. I reached out, touching the glass with trembling fingers. "He would never have wanted credit," I whispered. "Which is why I didn't give him any," Victor said gently. "But he deserves to be remembered." A tear rolled down my cheek before I could stop it. I didn't wipe it away. For the first time in my life, I felt like my father wasn't just a man the world had passed by. He was part of something bigger. He had built a legacy without knowing it. And somehow, through all the years of struggle, grief, and bad luck, that legacy had found its way back to me. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I stepped into my new role, working with therapists, meeting families, learning the stories behind every scar, every brace, every wheelchair. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. But every time I doubted myself, Oliver would smile at me and say, "You make it easier to be brave." And somehow, that was enough. 1 year later, on a warm spring afternoon, the foundation opened a new wing dedicated entirely to youth mobility development. Hundreds of people came: families, donors, former patients, volunteers, reporters, photographers. Victor gave a speech about hope, resilience, and the responsibility of those who have been helped to help others. Then he stepped aside and gestured for me. My heart pounded as I walked to the podium. I was just a mechanic's son from a trailer park who'd once stood in the rain holding a shivering child. Now I stood at the center of a room filled with children learning to walk, families learning to hope, and strangers whose lives were woven into the same thread as mine without us ever realizing it. I cleared my throat. My father used to say kindness is the only thing that saves a man. I began. I didn't understand what he meant until this year. I spoke about Oliver, about fear and courage, about the night in the rain that changed everything. I told them that sometimes the smallest act, a coat, a meal, a moment, can echo across decades in ways we never see coming. When the room rose in applause, I didn't look at the cameras. I looked at Oliver, at Victor, at the life I had never imagined but somehow reached anyway. Later that evening, as the event wrapped up, I stepped outside for air. A boy stood alone on the sidewalk, maybe 7 or 8, wearing shoes so worn the toes had holes. He watched the therapy center through the glass eyes wide with something between longing and fear. I walked over. "You want to come inside?" I asked. He shook his head. "I can't. I don't have good shoes for running." My heart twisted. Without thinking, I bent down and loosened the laces of my old sneakers, the ones I wore the night everything changed, the ones I kept even after I could afford better. I slipped them off and placed them in his hands. "They're not new," I said softly, "but they'll take you somewhere." His face lit up with a hope I recognized too well. And in that moment, I felt my father beside me, felt his coat around my shoulders, heard his voice in the wind. "This isn't the end, Eli. This is the next lap." And as the boy ran inside on unsteady legs, I knew he was right.